Ethan Cole had spent the whole day riding across the wide grasslands, checking fences that stretched farther than a man's eyes could follow. The sun was heavy and low, spreading gold across the hills, and the air carried that quiet, calm feeling that comes only at the end of a long, honest day of work. Ethan's horse, a tall brown gelding named Jasper, walked at a steady, tired pace. Ethan patted the horse's neck, feeling the sweat and dust mixed together. He was thinking about supper and a warm fire when he noticed something strange on the side of the trail. At first, he thought it was nothing, maybe a broken wagon, maybe a pile of old cloth someone had thrown away. But as Jasper walked closer, Ethan saw movement. A person was standing there. A woman, all alone. She stood near an abandoned wagon, her hand gripping the side like she needed it to stay upright. Her dress was simple, but dusty, like she had been walking for hours. Her long hair was tied loosely, and strands kept blowing across her face. She looked frightened, as if she had been watching the same empty road for far too long. Ethan slowed his horse. It wasn't normal to find someone out here at this hour, especially someone who looked as scared as she did. He pulled the reins and brought Jasper to a stop. "Ma'am," he called gently, not wanting to startle her. "You all right?" The woman lifted her head a little, and Ethan finally saw her eyes tired, worried, and full of something he could not name. In her hands, she held a worn canvas sack, tightly wrapped at the top. She clutched it against her chest like it contained something precious or dangerous. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she opened her mouth, and her voice came out as a whisper. "Please, I beg you," she said, her words trembling. "Take them off." Ethan blinked. He didn't understand. Take what off? He looked at the sack, then at her hands, then at her face again. Nothing made sense. He climbed down from his horse carefully, making sure she saw his movements so she wouldn't panic. "I don't mean any harm," he said softly, "but you gotta tell me what you're asking." She clutched the sack tighter, as if she feared it might slip away. "I tried," she whispered. "I really tried. But I can't. I'm too scared to do it. Please, take them off. Please." Her voice broke on the last word. Ethan stepped closer, but not too close. The evening air felt heavier now, the silence thicker. "Ma'am," he said again, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "What's inside the sack?" For the first time, she looked directly at him. Her eyes were wide, and he could see she hadn't slept. Maybe she had been crying earlier. Maybe she had been running. Something about her face made Ethan's stomach twist, not in fear, but in a kind of worry he felt for people who had seen too much trouble in a short time. She slowly extended the sack toward him. Her hands were shaking. "Please," she repeated. "Take them off." Ethan hesitated. The sack wasn't large, but it wasn't small either. It could have held something dangerous. A snake. A wounded coyote. Something wild. He pulled off one glove and reached out, feeling the rough fabric. "All right," he said cautiously. "I'll open it, but you need to step back." She nodded and took 2 steps away, though she still watched the sack like she expected something terrible to jump out. Ethan lowered the sack to the ground. He could feel soft movement inside. Not big movements, small ones. Rapid. Almost desperate. He untied the knot carefully, loosening it piece by piece. The woman covered her mouth with both hands and looked away. When the knot opened, Ethan slowly pulled the sack open and looked inside. He froze. It wasn't fear that stopped him, it was shock, and confusion, and a wave of sympathy he didn't expect. Inside the sack were 3 tiny prairie dogs, no bigger than his hands. Their fur was soft but dirty. All 3 were tangled in small metal loops. Illegal trap loops that cruel trappers often used. The loops were tight around their legs and tiny bodies, and the babies twitched weakly, making small squeaking sounds. Ethan's heart sank. Oh, You poor little things, he murmured, without thinking. The woman let out a soft cry when she saw his reaction. I didn't know what to do, she whispered. I found them trapped near that wagon. I couldn't leave them. I tried. I tried to free them, but I was afraid I'd hurt them. And then I heard footsteps earlier. I didn't know if the men who set those traps were coming back. Ethan looked up. Men? You saw someone? She nodded quickly. 2 of them. Strong. Rough-looking. They were walking down the hill, carrying more traps. They didn't see me. I hid behind the wagon. I waited until they left. And then, I grabbed the babies and ran. Her voice faded as she stared at the tiny animals. Ethan understood now why she had looked terrified. Illegal trappers often reacted badly when someone got in their way. They weren't the type to be reasoned with. He knelt and carefully lifted the first little prairie dog. Its leg was stuck in the metal loop. Ethan took out his small pocket knife, gently fitting the blade against the metal. He worked slowly, careful not to touch the baby's skin. After a few tense moments, the loop snapped open, and the tiny creature pulled its foot free. The woman let out a shaky breath. You did it. Ethan freed the second one, then the third, working methodically. The third baby was weaker than the others. It barely moved. Ethan checked it carefully, holding it in both hands. He's just exhausted, Ethan said gently. He'll be all right once he gets some rest. The woman sank onto the wagon wheel, her shoulders shaking not from fear anymore, but from relief. Thank you, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know who else to ask. I didn't know who would even stop. Ethan put the babies back in the sack so they wouldn't wander off but left it open so they could breathe. He stood up and offered his hand. My name's Ethan Cole, he said. She hesitated, then took his hand lightly. Lila, he repeated, giving a small nod. You need water? Food? She shook her head. I just need to get away from here before those men come back. Ethan looked toward the hills. The evening light made long shadows, and the wind carried the empty silence of the prairie. But silence didn't mean safety. If those men had been nearby once, they could return. You shouldn't be out here alone, Ethan said softly. Come with me. You and the babies both. She looked unsure for a moment, like she didn't want to burden him. But fear flickered in her eyes again. Please, she said quietly. I don't want to stay here. Ethan tied the sack carefully to the saddle and helped Lila mount Jasper. She sat behind him, holding onto the saddle horn. Ethan could feel how tired she was. Her arms trembled slightly as she tried to keep steady. He clicked his tongue, and the horse began walking toward the west, carrying them away from the lonely trail. The sky above turned a deep orange, fading into purple. And as they rode, Lila finally spoke again, her voice small in the evening wind. I didn't mean to bother you, she said. I just didn't want those little creatures to die, and I didn't want those men to find me with the traps. Ethan shook his head. You didn't bother me. Anyone would have helped. But inside, he knew that wasn't true. Many people would have ignored her. Many would have kept riding. The prairie stretched wide around them, quiet and beautiful. Lila leaned slightly against him, not out of closeness, but simply because exhaustion finally won over her strength. Ethan glanced back at her gently. You're safe now, he said again. And this time she believed it. Behind them, the road and the abandoned wagon grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely into the darkening land. What began with fear and uncertainty was now turning into a strange, unexpected night, one that neither of them would forget. Ethan kept Jasper at a steady pace as they moved away from the wagon site. The air grew cooler, and the sky slowly shifted into deeper shades of blue. As the last sunlight faded, Lila stayed quiet for a long time, holding onto the saddle horn with tired hands. Ethan could feel her uneasiness through the way she leaned just slightly forward, whenever a sound came from the hills or grass around them. "You're safe," he said again, gently, not turning fully so she wouldn't feel pressured to talk. "No one's behind us." "I know," she whispered, though her voice told him she was still thinking about those men. "It's just, I've never been this scared before." Ethan nodded. He didn't want to push her. Fear like that didn't disappear just because someone said the right words. Sometimes, fear stayed in a person's chest for hours, days, even years. They rode for another mile before Jasper snorted and flicked his ears back. Ethan slowed the horse and listened. A distant howl echoed across the plains. Not a threatening sound, just a lone coyote making itself known as night approached. "Don't worry," Ethan said softly. "That's just nature doing what it does." Lila let out a small breath. The kind that wasn't quite a sigh but wasn't relief either. She stared at the horizon. "I didn't know who else would help. I thought maybe everyone would just pass by." "Not everyone," Ethan said, guiding Jasper around a small ditch. "Just the wrong kind of folks would pass by. You happened to run into me instead." This time, she gave a tiny smile. It was faint, but it was the first smile he had seen on her face. Ethan didn't point it out, he didn't want to embarrass her. He just kept riding. Eventually, Ethan spotted the familiar shape of an old windmill in the distance. Its blades creaked softly in the breeze. Beyond it, a few faint lights glowed near the small cluster of buildings that made up the coal ranch. "We're almost home," Ethan said. "My sister Sarah is there. She'll know what to do with the injured little one." You live with your sister?" Lila asked. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "She keeps the place in order. Without her, I'd probably forget half of what needs doing." Lila gave a small nod, as if hearing about normal life made her feel a bit calmer. She kept her eyes on the dim lights, growing brighter with every step Jasper took. When they reached the front yard, Sarah stepped out onto the porch. She was in her early 30s, warm-eyed, practical, and always dressed, ready for work. She paused when she saw Ethan riding in with a stranger behind him. "Evening," Sarah called out. "You brought company?" "Kind of," Ethan replied as he helped Leela down. "This is Leela. She was stranded near an old wagon, found some animals trapped, and needed help." Sarah walked closer, her expression shifting from curiosity to gentle concern. "Are you all right, dear?" Lila nodded slowly. "I'm just tired. Thank you for letting me come here." "You're welcome. Anyone who helps little creatures is welcome," Sarah said with a smile. Ethan untied the sack from the saddle and opened it carefully. The 3 prairie dog babies lay inside. 2 of them were moving more strongly now after being freed. The third was still weak, breathing lightly. "Oh, poor thing," Sarah said as she knelt to look. "Bring them inside. They need warmth." Ethan followed Sarah into the warm, lamp-lit kitchen. Lila hesitated at the door for a moment, unsure if she was intruding, but Sarah waved her in. Come," Sarah insisted kindly. "You look like you need a warm seat yourself." Inside the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread filled the air. On the table sat leftover stew from earlier, still warm in a covered pot. Leela's stomach growled quietly, but she looked too shy to mention it. Sarah noticed anyway. "Sit down. You need food." She uncovered the pot and spooned some stew into a bowl. Lila nodded gratefully and sat, wrapping her hands around the warm bowl like she needed its heat to steady herself. Meanwhile, Ethan placed the sack on the counter and gently lifted each little prairie dog onto a soft cloth Sarah laid out. She examined them one by one, talking softly, as if they could understand her. "This one should be fine," she said about the first. "And this one too, just a little bruised." When she reached the weakest one, her face softened. "This little fellow needs rest, water, and something warm to sleep against." Ethan nodded. "We've got that heated cloth in the drawer," Sarah got it and warmed it near the stove before placing it beneath the tiny creature. The little prairie dog twitched weakly and curled closer to the warmth. Lila watched all this with wide eyes. I didn't know if they would live," she said quietly. "You saved them," Sarah told her firmly. "If you hadn't picked them up, they would still be trapped." Lila looked down at her hands. "I was afraid I would hurt them. I didn't even know how to hold them right. I just knew I couldn't leave them." "No one expects you to know everything," Ethan said, leaning against the counter. "You did the right thing, and you came to the right place." A small silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Lila ate slowly, savoring each warm bite. Her body relaxed little by little, like fear was melting out of her muscles. After a few minutes, she whispered, "Those men, the ones who set the traps, I don't think they like being challenged." Ethan stiffened slightly. "Did they see you?" "No," Lila replied. "But I heard them talking. They said something about coming back later." Ethan exchanged a look with Sarah. They both understood the problem immediately. Men like that didn't care about rules. They didn't care about people. They cared only about what they could take. "You don't have to worry tonight," Ethan told her. "They won't come here." 1. "But what if they saw me running with the sack?" Lila asked softly. "What if they followed?" "They didn't," Ethan said with calm confidence. "I would have seen signs on the trail. And I know the land better than they do." Lila nodded, though fear still flickered in her eyes. "Where were you headed before all this?" Sarah asked. "I travel between towns," Lila said. "I sew, mend clothes, help families. I left the last town this morning. But then my horse ran when it got spooked by a rattling noise. I walked miles looking for it, before I found the wagon and the traps." "That's a long walk for one day," Sarah said kindly. "I didn't think it would be so hard," Lila admitted. "I thought I could handle anything. But when I saw those animals trapped, and when I heard men coming, I suddenly felt so helpless." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Feeling helpless is human. What matters is what you did after. You didn't run from those babies. You didn't leave them." Lila looked down again, blinking fast. "I couldn't leave them," she whispered. "Not like that." Sarah placed a warm cup of tea in front of her. "Drink this. It'll steady your heart." Lila held the cup with both hands. "Thank you. Both of you." As she drank, Ethan checked the tiny animals again. The weakest one had begun breathing a little stronger. That was a good sign. Sarah stood and said, "You can rest here tonight. There's a spare room." Lila's eyes widened. I can't trouble you like that." "It's no trouble," Sarah said firmly. "The world works better when people help each other." Ethan nodded in agreement. "You're safe here. And you need rest." Lila swallowed, clearly overwhelmed. Later, after Lila finished eating, Ethan walked outside to check the fences near the yard, just to be sure. The night was calm. The stars were bright. No sign of danger. When he returned, he found Lila standing near the window, looking out. She turned when she heard him. "I never expected kindness like this today," she said softly. "When I asked you to open that sack, I didn't know if you would walk away." Ethan shrugged lightly. "I wasn't raised to walk away from someone who needs help." A faint smile appeared on her face. "You weren't raised like most people then." He smiled back, though only a little. "Maybe not." Lila looked at the small prairie dogs, sleeping peacefully near the warm cloth. "You saved them," she whispered. "And you saved me from being alone out there." Ethan shook his head. "You saved them first. I just finished the job. She lowered her eyes again, touched by the simple truth of his words. Outside, the night stretched quiet and wide across the plains. Inside the small ranch house, A tired young woman finally felt safe. 3 little animals slept without pain, and a cowboy who had only planned to go home for supper found himself quietly grateful that he had taken the long way back that evening. The night settled softly over the coal ranch, with only the faint sound of insects humming beyond the windows. Inside the warm kitchen, the small prairie dogs slept safely, their tiny bodies rising and falling gently against the heated cloth. Lila watched them for a moment longer before Sarah guided her toward the spare room. Ethan stayed behind to clean up the rest of the kitchen, giving the animals another check before stepping outside for a breath of night air. After several minutes, he returned to find Lila standing quietly near the table again. She looked more rested now, though her face still carried the weight of the long, frightening day. She had survived. Ethan didn't approach too fast. He had learned earlier that sudden movements only made her tense. "You should be resting," he said in a gentle voice. Leela turned slowly, her hands folded in front of her. "I tried," she admitted, "but my mind won't stop thinking. Everything that happened, it keeps replaying." "That's normal," Ethan said as he took a seat and motioned for her to sit as well. "Your head tries to make sense of things, even when your body is tired." Leela hesitated before sitting down across from him. "I never wanted to be in a place like that," she whispered. "Miles from town. Alone. Searching for my horse like a fool. Ideally was not a clam. Indecide. Miles not a clam." "You're not a fool," Ethan said firmly. "Just someone who faced a rough situation." She looked down at her hands. "Do you know what scared me the most? Not the traps. Not the animals. Not even the men. It was thinking that no one would come down that road. I kept telling myself someone would. But an hour went by. Then another." Ethan nodded slowly. "It's a lonely feeling. I've been there once or twice myself." "You?" she said, surprised. "You seem so confident. Like nothing can scare you." "Everyone gets scared," he replied. His honesty made her relax. She leaned back slightly, breathing deeper than before. The lamp on the table flickered softly, filling the room with a warm, golden glow that made the moment feel peaceful, almost gentle. She spoke again, this time in a quieter voice. "I didn't plan to travel alone. I was supposed to meet a group of families heading west. I've helped them with sewing for months. But they left yesterday morning. And I stayed behind because a woman needed her dress fixed for a wedding. I figured I would catch up with the group by evening. But then, everything went wrong." "What happened to your horse?" Ethan asked. Lila rubbed her forehead. "A pot rattled in my pack. It made a loud noise. My horse panicked and bolted before I could grab the reins. I tried chasing it, but you know how fast a scared horse can run. Faster than anything on 2 legs," Ethan said with a small chuckle. She smiled faintly. "I kept walking, thinking I would find it tied somewhere or grazing, but instead, I found that wagon and those traps." Ethan's expression darkened slightly at the mention of the traps. He hated trappers who used cruel methods, especially the kind who didn't care about suffering. "Tell me everything you heard," he said calmly. "It might help me understand the type of men we're dealing with." Lila nodded, gathering her thoughts. "I hid behind the wagon when I heard footsteps. I saw 2 men walking up the hill, carrying sacks full of metal traps. One of them was tall, with a rough beard. The other was shorter but broad-shouldered. They talked loudly. The tall one said they'd come back later for whatever got caught. Me. Illegal trappers," Ethan muttered. "They don't care about the animals. Or people." "They frightened me," Lila admitted. "They laughed like they didn't care who heard them. When they walked farther away, I came out and saw the baby prairie dogs struggling. I couldn't ignore them." "That took courage," Ethan said. She shook her head. "It didn't feel like courage. It felt like panic. I just knew I couldn't leave them." "But you didn't leave," Ethan replied. That's what matters. Lila looked at him for a long moment, her eyes calm for the first time that evening. Something in Ethan's steadiness comforted her. Maybe it was the way he never raised his voice. Maybe it was the quiet strength he carried without bragging. Maybe it was simply that for the first time in a long time, she felt safe around someone. Sarah returned briefly to check on the animals. The weak one's breathing is better, she reported with a warm smile. A few hours of rest, and he'll be good as new. That's a relief, Lila said, a soft glow filling her expression. Sarah winked. That's thanks to you. You're braver than you think. Then she went back to her room, leaving Ethan and Lila alone again. The silence between them was gentle, not uncomfortable. Ethan poured her another cup of tea without asking. She accepted it with both hands, grateful for the warmth. You know, Ethan began, as he leaned back in his chair. You don't have to continue on the road tomorrow. You can stay another night or two if you need, until you find your horse. That's kind of you, Lila said, though she looked unsure. I don't want to burden your family. You're not a burden, Ethan said simply. Besides, we've already got 3 extra little guests. She let out a soft laugh, the first real laugh he had heard from her. Ethan nodded. The first one woke up stronger already. Sarah has a gentle hand with animals. Today. Clace Tess. So do you, Lila added quietly. Ethan didn't respond right away. He wasn't a man used to compliments. He looked down at his hands, rubbing his thumb over the table grain. I just try to do what's right. You do more than that, she said softly. He looked up at her, and for a moment, they held each other's gaze. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, 2 people who had gone through something unexpected and were slowly learning to trust one another. After a while, Ethan stood. I should check the animals one more time before bed. I'll help, Lila said quickly, standing as well. If that's all right. Of course. They approached the counter where the cloth lay. The weakest prairie dog moved slightly, stretching its tiny legs. Lila smiled gently. He's a fighter. He'll live, Ethan said. Sometimes the smallest ones surprise you. Lila reached out slowly, touching the soft fur with the tip of her finger. The tiny creature didn't flinch. It curled closer to the warmth. She watched it, with quiet affection. I wonder if their mother is looking for them, she murmured. Maybe, Ethan said. But prairie dogs have big families. The little ones will find their way. Lila nodded. I hope so. Ethan looked at her, noticing how carefully she touched the small animal, how softly she spoke. It made him respect her even more. You did good today, Ethan said softly. Lila blinked, her eyes shining slightly. I just did what felt right. That's what good people do. Her breath caught for a small moment, but she quickly looked away, embarrassed by the emotions rising in her chest. When Ethan finished checking the cloth and the tiny animals, he stepped back and gave Lila room to breathe. She nodded. Thank you. Truly. He smiled a little. Good night, Lila. Good night, Ethan. As she walked down the short hallway toward the guest room, Lila felt something she hadn't felt all day: peace. The ranch felt warm and safe, like a place where trouble couldn't enter. Perhaps it was the kindness of Ethan and Sarah. Perhaps it was simply the relief of no longer being alone. Ethan remained in the kitchen for a moment after she left, looking at the tiny prairie dogs sleeping peacefully. He hadn't expected this day to end with strangers, injuries, and danger. But he also hadn't expected to feel this sense of quiet responsibility for someone he had just met. He blew out the lamp, leaving only the soft glow of the stove. As he walked toward his own room, he paused by the hallway, listening to see if Lila had settled. The house was silent. Good. She needed rest. Tomorrow would bring more questions about the trappers, about her lost horse, about what she would do next. But for now, the night held them gently, like everything dangerous had been pushed far away. Morning came gently to the coal ranch. Soft sunlight slipped in through the windows, touching the wooden floors and warming the rooms little by little. Birds chirped near the barn, their small voices filling the quiet air. Inside the house, Lila woke slowly, as if her body still didn't believe she was safe. She sat up and looked around the small but clean spare room. A folded quilt lay at the end of the bed, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted in from the kitchen. For a moment, she didn't move. She simply sat there and listened. No footsteps chasing her. No distant voices shouting. No metal clinking like the traps she had seen the day before. Only peace. She let out a soft breath she hadn't realized she was holding. When she opened the door and stepped into the hallway, she heard quiet talking from the kitchen. Sarah's warm voice and Ethan's calm tone blended easily, like this was their normal routine. But when they saw Lila, they both paused and smiled. "Good morning," Sarah greeted her with a cheerful voice. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little. More than I expected," Lila admitted. "Thank you both for everything." "You're welcome," Sarah replied, already placing a bowl of warm oatmeal on the table. "Sit. You need strength before the day starts." Lila sat softly, almost shyly. Ethan poured her a small cup of coffee and set it in front of her. "Hope you like it light," he said. "That's perfect," she replied, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. While she ate, Ethan checked the tiny prairie dogs. The weakest one was now sitting up, blinking slowly and adjusting its tiny body. Lila smiled when she saw it. "He's better." "He's tough," Ethan nodded. "He'll be ready to go home soon." Lila watched the small animal for a long moment. "I'm glad they survived," she whispered. "Yesterday, I didn't know what would happen." Ethan stood and put on his hat. "I'm going to check the fences," he said to Sarah. "And I'll take a look around the hills, just in case those men are nearby." Lila looked up quickly. "Do you think they still might be around?" "I don't know," Ethan answered honestly. "But I don't trust men who leave cruel traps. I want to be sure." She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening slightly around her cup. Ethan noticed. So he added, "You're safe here. I'll handle the rest." His calm confidence worked like a blanket over her nerves. She nodded. "Be careful." Ethan nodded once, then stepped outside. Sarah sat down across from Lila, resting her elbows lightly on the table. Ethan watches out for this place, like it's part of his own life. He's not looking for trouble, but he won't avoid it if it comes close. Lila nodded slowly. "He's different from most people I've met." Sarah smiled knowingly. "Yes, that's a good way to say it." As the morning went on, Lila helped Sarah with chores around the house. She swept the floor, washed dishes, and cleaned the cloth that had been used for the prairie dogs. Sarah didn't treat her like a guest, she treated her like someone capable, someone welcome. Lila didn't realize how much she missed feeling useful until she was doing small tasks that made her feel grounded again. Still, every once in a while, her eyes wandered toward the window, searching the horizon for Ethan. For some reason she couldn't explain, she felt calmer when he was nearby. Maybe it was because he had been the first person to stop, the first to listen, the first to help without complaining. An hour later, Ethan returned. Dust covered his boots, and his hat was tilted slightly from the wind. He stepped inside and set his gloves on the table. "Anything?" Sarah asked. "No men," he said. Lila felt a weight lift off her chest. "So they're gone?" "For now," Ethan replied. "But I still think you shouldn't travel alone until we find your horse." Lila nodded, appreciating his caution. After breakfast, Ethan added, "I'll take Jasper and look for your horse. It couldn't have gone too far." "I'll come with you," Lila said without thinking. Ethan looked at her carefully. "You sure? The hills might bring back a lot of fear." She hesitated, then stood straighter. "If my horse is out there, I need to be brave enough to help find it." A slow smile touched Ethan's lips. All right then. They packed water, a small first aid set, and a cloth just in case the prairie dogs needed to come along. But Sarah insisted on caring for them at home. I'll keep them warm, she promised. Go find that horse. Ethan saddled Jasper, and they began walking along the trail where Lila had come from the day before. The grass was tall, bending in the wind like waves. Lila walked beside Ethan, her steps small but steady. For a while, they walked in silence. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was peaceful. Like they both understood, the moment didn't need words. Finally, Lila spoke. I didn't think I would meet anyone kind out here. Most folks are kind, Ethan said. You just had the bad luck of running into the wrong ones. Still, she said softly, you stopped for me. I won't forget that. Ethan shrugged lightly. Anyone should have. But not everyone would, she insisted gently. Yesterday showed me that. Ethan couldn't argue with that. They reached a small creek, where the grass bent low. Ethan knelt and studied the tracks. These are fresh enough. We're heading the right way. Lila watched the way he examined the land. He seemed to understand the earth, like it was an old friend talking to him. She admired that how he read signs she couldn't even see. They walked for another mile, until they reached a cluster of oak trees. Under the shade, they heard a soft snort. There, Ethan whispered. Lila gasped. Her brown mare stood partly hidden behind the trees, nibbling on the tall grass. The horse lifted its head slowly, ears twitching as it recognized her. Oh, sweetheart, Lila whispered as she approached slowly. I'm right here. The horse didn't run. Instead, it stepped forward and nuzzled her shoulder, as if apologizing for the chaos of the previous day. Lila hugged the mare's neck, relief falling over her like warm rain. Ethan smiled softly. She was waiting for you. Lila looked over at him, her eyes shining. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if she was gone. Good thing she had the sense to stay near water, he said. Once the mare was calm, Ethan checked the saddle strap and reins. Everything was still intact. Lila climbed onto the horse, steady but still emotional. Ethan walked beside her as they returned to the ranch. For a long time, neither spoke. But there was no tension. Only quiet understanding. When they arrived, Sarah stepped outside immediately. You found her. Du can stand. Lila nodded, smiling fully for the first time. Yes, thanks to Ethan. The moment felt warm and bright, like the start of something new. Later in the afternoon, when the sun softened, it was time to release the prairie dogs back into the wild. Ethan, Sarah, and Lila walked to a patch of open land near the hills. Sarah carried the small cloth with the animals bundled gently inside. Ethan lowered them to the ground one by one. The weak one hesitated for a moment, then suddenly ran forward and followed the others. Lila clapped her hands softly, joy filling her face. They're free, she whispered. Ethan watched her more than the animals. There was something peaceful in her expression, something he hoped she would keep with her. As they walked back toward the ranch, the wind brushed gently across the grass, and Lila fell into step beside him. What will you do next? Ethan asked. I'll travel with the group I was supposed to meet, she said. But I think I'll stay one more night, just to rest properly. You're welcome to, Ethan said. She looked at him, her voice softer than the wind. Yesterday, when I saw you on the road, I didn't know if you would stop. I didn't know if anyone would. But you did. And you protected me, without even knowing who I was. You needed help, he replied simply. Yes, she whispered. I did. They reached the porch, and Lila paused, turning to him slowly. Ethan, she said quietly, I will never forget what you did. I will never forget that you made me feel safe when I was so scared. Ethan tipped his hat slightly. a gesture of respect. I'm glad I was there. Right, 1, 200 forms off. The evening settled over the ranch once again. But this time, there was peace instead of fear. Lila knew she would continue her journey soon. But she also knew that one unexpected evening, with a sack full of frightened creatures, a lonely road, and a cowboy who refused to walk away, had changed something inside her. And Ethan, though he said nothing, felt it too. The world was wide. But sometimes, in the quietest moments, it brought the right people together.